Welcome everybody to the PFF College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Seth, Galina, and on today's episode, we had the great friend of a podcast, Alex Kirshner, on from Split Zone Duo, from Slate, from 538, from all these places, to come on and give us a little, give me and Diante a little rundown, I guess you would say, of kind of the history of the pay college football players movement and how that works and how it's not really like, even though like this current installment of the pay college football players that has kind of worked out with the signings of all the NIL bills recently. It's not the first time that this has ever happened, and it kind of goes back throughout history. So we got to talk about that, and then we just went into college football, just a great off-season episode of talking about some guys, talking about our favorite college football teams and players from our favorite teams, from our non-favorite teams, over the course of our lifetime. So if you want to listen and hear names of some dudes that you haven't heard in a while, this episode is for you. So excited for you guys to listen to it. And don't forget, the College Football Preview Magazine is out on PFF.com, $7.99 if you have a subscription to the College Football Grades or PFF Edge, I believe. So go get that. We worked super hard on that. Me and Anthony Tresh will be back next week. So yeah, go get it, and I hope you like it. I hope you like this episode. We now welcome to the show, I believe, for his third time on the podcast, Mr. Alex Kirshner, host of the Split Zone Duo podcast, among many other things, and a true friend of the podcast. Alex, what's going on?
Seth, Diante, it's a pleasure to be with you. Can't imagine two better gents to talk about football with.
And the feeling is mutual. So we wanted to get into, we're going to have a very light conversation about our favorite college football things of all time, or of our lifetimes, I guess. But we wanted to start with some news about the NIL decisions that have happened and the fallout that's come from them. But really, with you, because you've done so much, research and studying up on the history of college football, my first question to you is like, how long ago did this kind of movement start? Like, obviously this particular movement maybe 5-10 years ago, but has there been a pay the players movement before this that kind of just petered out before? Has this come up a lot throughout the history of college football? Like, what's the deal here?
So people in college football have been trying to pay players, and players in college football have been trying to get paid for as long, roughly, as college football has existed. And I think that probably tracks a lot of industries where the labor is not allowed to be paid above the table. It finds ways to get paid. And I think that college football is no exception. There have been a lot of instances going back as far as like 1900, 1901, 1902, where you would have issues of like a Harvard and Yale game falling into a big dispute over whether or not a player was a professional athlete because they had once been paid to teach gym at a secondary school, and then they go and play in the Harvard Yale game. For me. Harvard did this with a player named Oliver Cutts, and Walter Camp got very pissed about it. It was a whole thing. I think that as far as an organized movement to pay players, it's happened on a couple of different fronts. It is true that as far back as like 1950 or so, there were 7 schools that basically told the NCAA, screw it, we are not going to follow your rules against paying players. These schools became called the Sinful Seven, and a couple of colleagues and I actually wrote a book about that, which you can read at sinful7.com, where they just stood up and declined to follow the NCAA's rules. The NCAA tried to expel them, but didn't have the votes. And ever since then, you've sort of had some renegade factions within the NCAA that have tried to push the limits of what you're allowed to do with players and what you're not. I think that this movement to pay athletes, or to allow athletes to be paid by third parties for the use of their name, image, and likeness, has really gained a lot of steam just in the last 10 years. I think it's a relatively recent thing. If you look back as far as like 2010, when Cam Newton's dad allegedly charged a hefty fee, or attempted to, for his son's college football services, it was kind of considered at the time to be like a bad thing that Cam Newton's family allegedly did. Like, if you remember in that Iron Bowl in 2010, which Alabama fans would very much like to forget. They had played during warm-ups. They had played that song, Take the Money and Run. Like, they held up signs. They called him, like, Scam Newton, and they put dollar signs next to his name. And that was like a got you. Like, that was considered like, wow, like, we really zinged this guy. It's really embarrassing that he may have been compensated to play football. I think it started to change around like 2013 to 2015. There were some high profile cases. You remember Johnny Manziel was one of them, where he was, I think, trying to take some money for autographs. Todd Gurley, who at the time in 2014 or 15 was like the Heisman frontrunner, and got popped by the NCAA over something as stupid as autographs. I think people started to see those cases and be like, why on earth are we caring about this? Like, why does this matter? This is the most basic thing in the world, and like, everyone else can do it. And even if you couldn't, it just didn't feel very consequential. And I think that, like, as the media dynamics have changed over the last 5 or 10 years, it's just become something that is no longer viewed as the scandal it was once viewed at. Like, I don't think either of you see college athletes getting paid as any kind of scandal. I think you see it as a good thing, and so do I. And it's a huge sea change from where we were even 10 years ago, 10-ish years ago, when the Nevin Shapiro stuff at Miami came out. And it was like this huge scandal that this booster at Miami was just splashing cash all over the program. If that happened today, like, I think a lot of people who have pretty big platforms would just kind of shrug and say, oh, well, you mean he didn't give him more? So it's just a totally different media dynamic, public dynamic around this. I don't think it's been one organization pushing forward. I mean, college athletes do not have a union. They have very little national organization. I just think that attitudes have changed, and the way people view the issue has changed. And as a result, political pressure kind of gradually has ratcheted up on the NCAA to make some changes here.
So what I find so interesting about that, I was actually kind of Googling some things as you were talking, because I wanted to make sure I had the timeline right. But what you mentioned follows exactly kind of how I went from being, I guess, maybe kind of just like a shrug of the shoulders. I didn't really care, how if guys got compensated or not, to becoming like a staunch supporter of the idea of at least college athletes being able to maximize their name, image, and likeness. And it probably really does start with Cam Newton, because I remember the week going into the SEC championship game and all of the fallout. And I can just remember as a high school kid thinking, well, if we put everything else down, is it good for the sport if the obvious Heisman winner does not get a chance to participate in the SEC title game and maybe not the national championship game because of this allegation? So that was kind of where it started. And then I remember the Ed O'Bannon class action lawsuit. And then we had, as you mentioned, the Todd Gurley autograph scandal, the Johnny Manziel autograph scandal, and then Northwestern trying to get unionized, Northwestern's players trying to lead the charge on getting college players unionized around that time as well. And I just remember all those events happening one after another, and then really kind of coming to, a crescendo with your colleague Stephen Godfrey's piece and work around Ole Miss and Mississippi State and all of those issues. And by the end of it, on a certain level, beyond however I may feel about it, politically or economically, I just thought that it was just such a dumb idea that we were spending all this time in collegiate sports trying to police where these dollars are going. And the more you hear from the NCAA, I think the more it reinforces how you feel if that's the stance that you take. So it has been very interesting over the last decade. I've talked to people, people who are family or family friends who in the beginning, when I was a college athlete, thought it was the craziest idea in the world that a player would be getting paid. And now they're like, oh, it was only $10,000 that they're alleging. That's a blue chip prospect. I would have thought it would have been X, Y, and Z amount of money, And so we have definitely softened our stance culturally about how we approach these issues.
It's been one of the few things that I think generates cross-ideological agreement in America today. You just saw it at the Supreme Court. Not a ton of cases get 9-0 rulings in the Supreme Court, but this kind of loosely related NCAA case, the Alston case, where the NCAA was trying to get basically a green light to make whatever rules it wants without getting sued on athlete compensation. And everyone from Clarence Thomas to Sonia Sotomayor was like, nope, not doing that. And you've seen the same thing in Congress. You've seen it in various state legislatures with governors ranging from like Ron DeSantis to Gavin Newsom. And it's like, there's not a lot that we really agree on in this country today, the big royal we. but it does feel like the general issue of NCAA policy, NCAA amateurism is becoming one of those things.
It is crazy to me how quickly, I mean, it's been 10 years ish, but like how quickly our views have changed. And like, I would just, 10 years ago, I was like in my early 20s. So like, what did I know about anything? But like, I didn't, it was like, oh, okay, the NCAA propaganda machine was putting its full weight on me. And it's like, oh, this is just normal. Like, of course, like, yeah, we should pay them, but it's not a big, you know what I mean? Like, and you're trying to fit both sides. Like, oh, but they get a scholarship, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, not that much long after that, it's like, I've gone the complete opposite direction. And there was a really good article on the Washington Post, which quoted your Split Zone host, Richard Johnson, and our friend, talking about how, the article was about how the ideas have flipped and how like how the media has talked about paying players and how the NCAA works has changed dramatically, and how we're such a gossipy, scandalous type of culture. I mean, I live in Canada, but it's the same thing, where it's like, oh, we loved the Nevin Shapiro case because it was gossipy. It was like, oh my God, can you believe this happened? We loved all those cases. The Nike shoes stuff in the basketball realm, like we loved that stuff because it's like who we are as a culture. But it takes some time to like take a step back and say, okay, well, we like this stuff, but it's not helping anybody. And one of the things that I've been thinking about recently is, and I think this is true whenever an important law gets changed, it's like you look about the people whose lives, like it's real, man. The people whose lives were ruined, and the first name that pops in my head is Maurice Claret. Like the people whose lives were ruined because of bogus rules. I think Claret, I should have looked this up, but Claret was like he got a free tattoo. Or am I making that up?
It was some ticky-tack thing. So it's like, and it ruined his ability to make a living, or he should have had money even before that point, in the year and a half or 2 year or a year that he was at Ohio State. So I think about those guys and how awful, how much better their lives could have been. Absolutely. And Maurice Claret's a great example. He was robbed above board by these NCAA rules. He didn't have much, and he wound up turning to like actual bad things with actual victims to try to, because that's what he thought he had to do to make ends meet. And it wasn't his fault. I mean, it was a system. I mean, obviously we could have a long debate about personal responsibility and all of that, but it was
Let's do it right now.
Let's do it right here on the show. But it was set up by an unjust system in which he could have made a lot of money and had a very comfortable life, but he wasn't allowed to. And it is in a way really upsetting that he didn't come around 20 years later so that he could enjoy a slightly more just system. Slightly, because I still don't think we're all the way there. Right. But he was a man before his time.
Is there since it's July 7th, so it's been about a week since the laws came into effect. Has it been overwhelming for you guys to see how much it's like, how quickly? I mean, obviously all these athletes had deals ready to go, before July 1st, obviously that was going to happen. But it's like the breadth and the depth of which all these athletes are getting a chance now. We're seeing like entire offensive linemen being sponsored by like barbecue places. I saw Miami has a booster who's going to spend like $500,000 or something like that. Like, has that surprised you? Like, did you think it was going to be this big, this fast, this quickly?
Miami having the booster throwing the most money around absolutely does not surprise me. I think if we were going to guess which school would have a booster who would say, I'm going to offer a few $1,000 to everyone on the team right off the bat, 99 out of 100 people, we probably would have correctly guessed the U. And that's why we love you, the U. But I'm not too surprised by it. I think that it's like, if you looked at this ahead of time, you would have figured that there'd be a lot of deals out there. You probably would have figured that there'd be a rush right at the beginning. I will be curious to see like where the market winds up. These players right now, I think that the vast majority of the deals that we've seen signed, we're talking like a couple $100, if that. Like these are for the most part not like earth-shattering deals, but that doesn't mean they're not important to the people making them. Like when I was in college, I would have loved to have made $150 sending a tweet or an Instagram post. That would have really like changed my my week to month, and it would have been a really good thing for me. So we'll see. I have some questions about where this will ultimately go. I think if I have any sources of skepticism, it's kind of about the check cashing companies, if you will, that have positioned themselves between athletes and potential sponsors. Yeah. And also like how universities are going to meddle in this. I've got some questions about that. Obviously hope that schools are doing what they can to educate players about the tax consequences of these deals and things like that, because it's another thing that I don't think I would have been mindful of at all in college. So I don't think so far it's been overwhelming at all. I think that there are a few lingering questions, and we will see how they shake out. But how they shake out can't be worse than what it was, where you had an incredibly unjust thing going on. And I'm sure that there will be some people who will probably wind up getting into bad deals and will get hurt, because that's what happens when you have free markets. But it's still better than not being allowed to make money at all.
Right. Yeah, I would say that I'm not much surprised by what we've seen lately, and I definitely would not use overwhelmed as a word. This is something, Seth, that you and I and a few other people have had conversations about. I always was of the belief that there would be an ecosystem that could very easily translate itself to offering, sponsorships and things of that nature to players, for visibility purposes. Some things, you may chuckle at, guys showing up, where fireworks and stuff are being sold and selling autographs. Like, you may get a brief chuckle out of that just thinking of the circumstance. But as you said, Alex, all of these things are good things because the market did not exist at all, before the day it was allowed. So I'm happy to see that players are taking these NIL deals. As you said, there are going to be inevitably some things that are not perfect, some things that put people in position where there may be some negative tax implications, where maybe guys don't get paid out the way that they did, where maybe contracts have longer durations or, different types of splits in terms of what you do get paid for over how much time and things like that will be problematic. But as you mentioned, Alex, that is kind of the nature of opening up the market at all. And I would take that over not having one in the first place. And my biggest concern is going to be how the universities react. It was never my thought. I always dismissed out of hand the idea that Under Armour would try to show up to a kid that plays at a Nike school and say, hey, where are cleats? We'll pay you an exorbitant amount of money. It's just the context of college sports and the way that these sponsorships and endorsement deals work at that level, it does not allow for those types of things in the first place. So that's not my concern so much. It's going to be, hey, the $100 million local company that really wants to get involved with some of these players, is the university going to try to wedge out some players and make them play ball first with the university before they can start playing, before they can start handing out money to players, for their name, image, and likeness. So that's really what I'm most interested in, over the next 5, 7, 8 years, because it's not something I think that we're going to get immediate returns on.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I have a lot of similar questions about how schools are going to act. They've sort of started to telegraph this, and some of it's been prescribed by state laws that say, you can't be involved in this industry or that, You've BYU, I think in their honor code, they banned the Big Five, which was porn, gambling, alcohol, drugs, and coffee.
The greatest sin of all, caffeine.
So they've. I might be messing up one of the other ones, but anyway, the Big Five. That's the Big Five, and it'll be interesting to see, like, do athletes get in trouble because they push a little farther than school policies, NCAA policies, state laws say they can. I'm sure that someone will. I mean, someone is going to do something with like a beer at some point, right?
Like, or with the dispensary, and there's going to be something like that.
Like, it feels inevitable that at some point someone is going to try that, and that'll be a new test case, and we'll see what happens. And more power to them, in my opinion, especially because right now, gambling being a great example. Like, that's where the money is flying around in sports right now. Like, we've got this new burgeoning industry, a couple of sports books throwing money like at everybody who has any kind of platform whatsoever. We're going to see some athletes who probably want to get in on that and might try to do it at some point. I think that one is a tough one because it kind of creates competitive integrity concerns. And so, pro athletes in large part do not partner with those companies anyway, but it's a lot is kind of up in the air in that regard for me.
Okay, so Alex, you are from Pittsburgh and you went to the University of Maryland, correct?
Guilty and guilty.
Diante, you are from San Diego. You went to Sac State.
Correct.
I'm from Montreal. I went to Concordia University. What, either from your home city or from where you went to school, what like place would you have loved to be sponsored by?
Ooh. You know, I might have wanted to be sponsored by Mrs. T's Pierogies in Pittsburgh because, you know, I love potatoes, and I think that you've got to be true to yourself. You know, I'm not going to be a good pitch man for a product that I haven't used, so I've certainly used those pierogies.
That's a good one. So I was actually racking my brain about, don't want to approach this as the 28-year-old degenerate I am or how I would have felt as the 18-year-old degenerate I was. So I think the 18-year-old me would have loved a Jack in the Box partnership. You know how popular I would be on a college campus with those 2 tacos for 99-cent deals that I can make for free. You know, now I would have been the greatest person in the dorm room ever with that type of thing. And now as an adult, I probably would love nothing more than Ballast Point or Stone Brewing, you know, or Rubio's Fresh Mexican Grill, you know, same deal, tacos, beers. All that sounds like a great idea to me.
Yeah,
who could be mad at that?
You've clearly grown in the 10 years since,
right.
since you stepped in
Correct.
Sacramento.
Correct.
I mean, this is gonna go over most people's heads, but I'll say like La Belle Province here in Quebec, because it's like it's hot dogs. Like I just want, you know, you want an easy place, hot dogs and fries. You know, like the good fries where it's like use potato deep fry and like there's some skin still on the fries. They're not like McDonald's fries were like perfectly cut every time. Like these are the fries you want. So I'm going La Belle Province here in Quebec. All right, we're gonna get into this very light topics that I presented to you guys before we started talking about our journeys through loving and watching college football. So the first thing I want to ask you guys is, which outdated offense would you have loved to either play in or like coach now or like coach then or whatever? Like, what is that offense that you're like, man, I kind of just loved it just aesthetically. Like, it doesn't have to be like, oh, well, this is the best offense because it's super efficient, blah, blah, blah. Just like aesthetically, like what is the offense that just, that makes your brain smile?
Well, for me, the answer is different if it's playing or coaching in that offense. I think that if I'm a player, I might want that real uncut air raid that Leach and Hal Mummy were running in like 1989 in a community college in Iowa. I don't know if have you guys ever read The Perfect Pass? It's the book that follows Hal Mummy during that time. Very good book, recommended, especially for some nerds like you guys. You'd probably enjoy it too. But it talks about like the ways that Leach and Mummy didn't even really like to have their players like run sprints. It's like, we don't want to have you be tired doing that. You know, it was just like there was very little contact in practice, and they just would do these kind of very, very Mike Leach air raid things because Leach was sort of helping to develop the offense. Like, you know, they ran 3 plays. You know, it was like 4 verts and Y cross and maybe one other. And they like the offensive lineman would stand like 5 feet apart because you're just trying to create long pass rushing routes to the QB so that you don't have time to get there, even if you don't get touched as a pass rusher. That would be really fun to play in, I feel like, because the physical effort is like, there's not too many things to like, you know, have to sprint out. There's only a couple plays you have to learn. I think that if I was a coach, I would like the single wing because it's not my head that's getting destroyed. So that would be fun.
All right, I like that. Just skirting all responsibility.
Absolutely, yes.
No, never mind. I was going to make a joke that one of our colleagues, Justice Mosqueda, makes, but I don't know if PFF would like to hear that one. For me, playing and coaching, I think that there's nothing that looks more aesthetically pleasing to me than like a perfectly executed triple option. That is still like just the peak of like offensive football in terms of every piece being, you know, in concert, in unison, quote unquote, the defense can never be right, you know, all of those types of things. That's probably what I'm drawn to the most. A close second would definitely be the single wing. The idea that like, we're just going to hold on to the ball for literally as long as humanly possible, and we're just going to headbutt you over and over and over and over. and one of us is going to tap out, but we won't know until the end of the game. That's very aesthetically pleasing to, meathead me as well.
I also think, the single wing is interesting just from obviously you've had to play against it, Diante, as a coach, and it's like that you're always thinking about the offenses that are like tough to deal with, and that single wing always comes up in these discussions. Can you explain? Can you go into a little spiel on like why the single wing is still an important offense in at least high school football?
Because it removes any ability for the defensive coach to be a genius. Like there's no master defense for it. There's no awesome blitz. There's no shutdown coverage. There's none of that. We are just going to be making contact with one another all game long, and whichever team is tougher is the one that's going to come out on top. So from that perspective, it's tough, right? Because that as a coach, it removes some of the illusion of control that you like to believe that you have over the outcome of the game, and it puts a lot more of that into the players' hands than I think any coach would like. So that's probably why I dislike it the most. And on a certain level, like, how do you prepare for that? The chances are, if you see something like the single wing, it's probably just like the triple, probably only one team that you're going to see all year that does it. They probably run it, as one of like the top 10 teams in the country that do it, and they're very well, they're very well polished. They probably have good athletes because they're so good at it. They're probably a successful school. So now good players want to go play for those places. It's a headache on so many levels.
I also think there's a sweet spot. Like misdirection is important for every offense, but there's certainly like a sweet spot in that high school level where defensive players can get confused a lot easier. So I think that's why the single wing. Going back to the air raid stuff you're talking about, I probably might have said this as my answer had 2020 not happened, and like the bad taste in my mouth that I have from watching Mississippi State this past year. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because like, yes, I'm on board. And especially like, if you had asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have 100% said the air raid, because it was still relatively new on a national stage. And it was like, that's what how offenses made sense to me. My answer is going to be in that triple option vein. It's going to be the wishbone specifically. And, like and it's funny because when I think about that offense, I'm like, you have the wishbone. It's a super fun offense to watch. When you watch those old Oklahoma teams, Texas teams, etc. But like, efficiency wise, you should just break it and run the flex bone. But you know what I mean? Because then now you can run some, more motions, and you have two guys who can be receivers rather than two guys who are 7 yards back in the backfield. Yeah. And then I think of that and I'm like, well, you can even be more efficient than that and like have those two wings be actual slot receivers and run like Utah's offense from Urban Meyer days. You know what I mean? I'm like, but like, so like I every time I think about it, my mind just keeps going spreadier and spreadier. But I still think there's something aesthetically pleasing about those old wishbone teams. I think something has to do with the literal backfield alignment. Like the angles are like perfect for viewing pleasure. So I'm gonna say the wishbone for my answer. And I wish some team would bring it back, but like I said, it just doesn't seem like an efficient way to get the job.
You know what I would love? I would love to see a great program like an Alabama or Georgia break out the old Maryland eye in a short yardage situation. Like put two defensive tackles as the fullbacks and your best athlete as a running back and just mash people. I would love to see that.
My old NCAA 2004 playbook, basically.
Literally, like I can hear Lee Corso's voice in my head right now as I say this.
I think that on the 2 points, on the Mississippi State point from last year, they did almost ruin the air raid completely for me. I think that you guys had some stats at PFF that were like, there were several weeks where I would look at this where they faced the fewest blitzes in FBS in that week, and yet their quarterback was pressured the most times in FBS. And like, I know he's dropping back a lot, but like, that shouldn't be possible. I don't know if I can cuss on this podcast.
It's not even just the lack of blitzes, because like, it's even less than a regular 4-man rush. It was like 3-man. They saw the most 3-man rushes I would imagine, I mean, definitely in our database from 2014 on, but you would imagine in the history of college football also.
Yes.
And
When they played Texas A&M, I remember there were at least 5 different times where A&M rushed 3, and where whichever poor soul was at quarterback at the time, I forget if it was Costello or Rogers.
Is the other guy, yeah.
But he was running for his life within 1.8 seconds of the snap with a 3-man rush. And it's like you might as well just put cones in front of him and just say, please don't come back here.
Well, I made that joke. I made a joke on Twitter, like, I don't know, a couple months ago, because they were so bad, right? And I was like, and me and Diante on this podcast for 6 months now have talked about, it's over, the air raid's done, like, forget about it, like, you just don't even think about it, because it doesn't like vibe well with where we see kind of football going. It's just like, it happened and had its place, you know, the super spread, one back, you know, two slots, whatever, had its place, but it's over, like, forget about it. But then you go and you watch Nevada with Hal Mummy's son as the offensive coordinator, and they're ripping it. They're like throwing for like 500 yards a game. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, never mind. Maybe the air raid's not completely done.
Right. Yeah.
Is anyone still running it though? Right. Like, do you consider Diante anybody other than Leach to be running like the air raid?
I do. And unfortunately it happens at my favorite school, and I have to just suffer through this every week. Because Graham Harrell is definitely still a big believer.
Yes, which makes sense.
True air raid, which I understand. Yes. Like, and part of it is me just being like the turn my nose up, blue blood college football program fan. We're above this type of thing. I will not run from that. I 1000% accept the fact that that's part of me. It's not dead, but there is a certain part of it. Like, when the air raid's not working, it is hard to watch. Same with like the triple option. Like, if you play a defense that really knows how to stop the triple option, that is not a fun watch at all. And those are always the offenses that I kind of judge, as the same, because they are very niche. If we're talking about the purest forms and, defenses that can stop it, they give it a really hard time. And when it's rolling, you think, well, why doesn't everybody do this? And I've been there.
Last year's Army-Navy game, a great example of this. Mm-hmm. Army and Navy, their coaches will tell you that the absolute biggest nightmare to play is the other, because they know how to play against that option. Everyone pretends that the on-field content of an Army-Navy game is like the greatest thing ever. And I think people do it to project how much they love the troops. Like, people absolutely do that. Look, the tradition around Army-Navy, the tailgate scene, the pageantry, love that. That is legitimately wonderful. It's a great rivalry. You don't have to lie. You don't have to insult the troops by lying to them that watching Army and Navy's defenses hold the opposing flex bones to like 3.1 yards per carry in a 6-3 game is good. We don't have to lie about that. There's a lot of reporters who lie about that year in and year out. And don't get me wrong, there are some good games between those teams. But liars. Just complete liars.
The best thing about the Army-Navy game on the field is the fact that CBS can't stretch it out into a 4.5-hour production because the game literally happens too fast.
Yeah, it's bad. No, honestly, it's funny because, watching those offenses generally is super fun. And then they play against each other, and like you said, it's pretty rough. Absolutely. I think there were some times where, during the long Navy winning streak, that Army was just so bad that they could roll, and you saw some nice plays offensively. But honestly, the past 5 years, it's been no good. Another example of the air raid is what happened in Baylor last year with Larry Fedora going there. And, you could argue, is Charlie Brewer good? Is he not good? Whatever. But like, it was a 1-year thing with Fedora. Like, Aranda brought him in. It didn't work out. He's already gone. And they're going to Jeff Grimes, who obviously was a hot name because of what he did at BYU. But it's kind of a completely different offense. What he did at BYU compared to what Fedora was kind of still running an air raid type of style. And it was just a 1-year thing, and now he's already gone.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say, before we move on that is that one's a little bit difficult for me to parse whether or not that's an air raid issue or a Larry Fedora issue. That's kind of the way that I'm looking at that one.
Yeah, especially you look at how North Carolina has like come out of nowhere. And their record, like they were like 7-6 2 years ago, and they I think probably had like 9-10 wins last year. But like just right after Larry Fedora's gone, all of a sudden North Carolina and Mac Brown have kind of rebounded, and he's made some really good coaching hires too. In these uncertain times, life is full of questions like, when should I start thinking about life insurance? But however difficult these questions may be, Western and Southern can help you answer them. Backed by over 130 years of experience, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind. Western and Southern Financial Group, life insurance, retirement, and investments. Compensated endorser, products issued by member companies of Western and Southern Financial Group, Cincinnati, Ohio. I want you guys to remember that if you are listening to this PFF podcast, we have other great podcasts on our PFF podcast network, which covers, of course, the NFL, fantasy football, and this show, college. So you can recap the NFL draft with PFF Mike and PFF Austin on 2-for-1 Drafts. Probably one of the best podcasts out there, in my opinion. You can check out Ian Hardett's fantasy football podcast and get a leg up on your league. I'm going to need it next year because I finished very poorly last season in fantasy football, and get all your 2021 betting content with the PFF forecast, another great podcast. So a lot of podcasts on the network. Make sure you tune into all of them. Okay, so I'm an LSU fan. Alex, you're a Pitt and Maryland fan?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
Grew up with Pitt, and then still care about them, and I would say I picked up Maryland when I had the misfortune of being a Maryland football fan when I went to school there.
And Diante, you are a Clemson fan, right? That's correct.
Clemson, Oklahoma, USC fan. If that's, like everybody puts the Abbeys are like the Lakers, the Yankees.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I look at it too. If you're a powerhouse, I watch you.
All right, so let's start. Let's just go around like your favorite moments, your favorite season, I should say, or moment from your favorite team. We can go one at a time, however you guys want.
I'll let you take that first, Alex.
I don't have a favorite for Maryland, other than I guess the time that we played Texas in a home and home and went 2-0 because that's pretty fucking funny to do that. Pretty funny. I think for Pitt, my favorite moment as a Pitt fan, aside from the entirety of Larry Fitzgerald's time at Pitt, which I'll get to, was the 2007 Pitt-West Virginia game when Pitt was under 500 and West Virginia was number 2 in the country in Morgantown. All they needed to do was win. They were going to play for the BCS championship, and Pitt beat them 13-9. Those numbers are etched in every Pitt fan's and West Virginia fan psyche, I think, for the rest of eternity. I was able many years after that, to do a story about maybe 10 years after that, where I talked to a lot of guys on both teams, some coaches, Dave Wanstead, Owen Schmidt, and the pain with which like Owen Schmidt still talked about that game in 2017 when we talked for it. In a way, I mean, I felt bad for him. Like it was clearly searing for him even 10 years later, but it also is kind of what's great about college football. You could care that much about 60 minutes of play that much later. So I would go with, and because I'm a spiteful hater, the moment when my sub 500 team kept their rival out of the biggest win of their lives.
What was the Wanstead years like for a Pitt fan?
Better than some other years, I would say. I mean, he wasn't a horrendous Pitt coach. I think that he was probably around the median Pitt coach. Like, if you're Pitt, I think a reasonable expectation, especially in those days, was that you would be in the upper half of the Big East and maybe make a charge at it in the right years. He never did win the Big East, but he got close. I think that the year, maybe it was 2009, that Cincinnati with Brian Kelly and with like Zach Pike and Armand Binns and various other.
I remember those names. Yeah,
Cincinnati's had some really good teams over the past 15 years.
They had some guys. Marty Gilliard was on that team, I believe, though I could be remembering some guys and conflating them. But that was like, a pretty solid coaching job, and Pitt was going to go to overtime with Cincinnati that year if the holder didn't botch an extra point or if the defense had just gotten a stop after that. So he was okay. I mean, he's like the most Yinzer guy in the history of Yinzers.
Oh, he's from Pittsburgh?
Oh yeah, he's from Pittsburgh. Okay, I mean, sense. he is like a walking coleslaw and French fry sandwich of a person. That's how I would describe him. I mean, he could not be more of a Pittsburgher. But, at the end of the day, I think it had been the better part of a decade and you're not winning much. So it's time to go and hire someone else who also won't win much, because that's the way college football works.
That's correct.
All right.
Diante?
For me, for the national championships and the great runs that USC has had still to this day, and it probably will not ever change, my favorite moment by far was the 2008 Notre Dame USC game. All right, so just to run through the box score briefly. Notre Dame, 4 total first downs all game long. Total yardage, 91. Okay. Yards per play, 1.9. USC almost had more yards in penalties than Notre Dame had in the game. Okay. And that was and at that point, and the reason why it's such a big moment for me as a fan is that this was the Jimmy Clausen is the number 1 quarterback in the draft hype season. All year long, the entire preseason, everybody talked about he can win the Heisman. He's going to return Notre Dame to what they used to be. I believe this is still Charlie Weiss's Notre Dame era. So he's also getting all of the off the Belichick tree hype, and he's going to be the next big offensive coach. And the fact that they came in there and caught the most pissed off USC team. I don't know if everybody remembers that 2008 team. That was just as talented as the 2 teams that went to back-to-back national titles. And the only thing that got in their way was a Thursday night trip to Corvallis, Oregon.
Yeah, man.
Not a place you want to go on a weeknight.
Dude,
not a place you want to go on a weeknight.
So funnily enough, the fact that this is my favorite moment, that is easily my lowest moment as a USC fan. It was fresh off the week after they destroyed Ohio State. So everybody that's a USC fan is just at their absolute peak. This is nexus of shit-talking USC fans. And to go get their heart broken then. And
couldn't beat the real OSU.
Unfortunately. But yeah, that's definitely the peak.
Am I wrong to think that USC has 2 seasons where they are a loss to Oregon State away from being undefeated? Was that 2004 as well? Or who did they lose to in 2004?
I think 2004 was UCLA. I believe 2004 was UCLA.
I remember. I feel like I in my head I see 2 of them. But anyways, yeah, that's a
no. 2004 was a championship year. I apologize. Maybe you're thinking of 2003 or 2006.
Yeah, that team is loaded.
It is 2003, and they lost to Cal.
Cal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, the OA team is absolutely loaded as I go through the roster. The interesting thing is a lot of them didn't pan out as much. Maybe in the NFL, you're looking Matt Khalil obviously played in the NFL for a bit. The receivers didn't really do much. I mean, I remember when Patrick Turner was hyped up to be the dude. Yeah. Obviously, Mark Sanchez didn't really do anything. Obviously, played a few years, but yeah, it's not a Clay Matthews kid. That's fine. Cushing, defense is pretty good. But yeah. Everson Griffin, wow. Yeah, it's and is that that's the end, right? Was there another great USC team?
If we're talking about
this?
peak, where as far as talent goes, yes, that was the end. That was by far the last year that they had that much NFL talent on their team. They had obviously the suspension year with Lane Kiffin, where I think they went 10-2 and beat a really good Oregon team. I think that was probably the best. And then they obviously had the Rose Bowl year with Sam Darnold. But as far as talent goes, yeah, 2008 was it. That was definitely the hard line in terms of USC being that near Bama-esque, Clemson-esque, Ohio State-esque level of talent that we see today.
All right. So for me, obviously the answer is 2019 LSU, whatever. That's too obvious. So the one that sticks out in my mind because it's kind of cemented my LSU fandom is LSU Georgia 2003, where Skylar Green catches the game-winning touchdown with a minute left. Great game, 2 really good teams. Saban had turned around LSU. Rick was probably in his first few years there at Georgia too, and obviously he went on to do a really good job. It's funny you talk about Owen Schmidt not kind of getting over that game for West Virginia. And I feel I talked to David Pollack, and I don't want to put words in his mouth at all, but it feels like, he probably gets asked about that game a lot too. And that's a game that he'll never get over because they felt like they should have won the game, and the kicker missed like 4 field goals and they should have won the game. And of course LSU wins it. And even though they lost to Florida a couple of weeks later because they forgot how to cover running backs out of the backfield, they end up winning the national championship because of all those missed field goals. So yeah, that kind of cemented I had a broken arm. I broke my arm playing football. I got sacked and broke my arm. And the other moment that I'll say, I put it under favorite moments, but it's just like a moment, just a general moment, is the 2011 national championship game. I don't think, and I know all LSU fans feel the same way, who are like watching at home, or maybe you were even in the Superdome that night watching them play Alabama. Like the feeling of helplessness, like, yes, I don't think that'll ever leave me, because like, yeah, it's like, of course I don't play. I don't, you know what I mean, not on the field to help them, but like you still feel like there's something that you're a part of this whole situation. And like,
who do you think felt more helpless? Alabama fans watching their kicker miss 17 field goals in the regular season version of that game, which they lost 9-6, or you guys watching, which was it, Eddie Lacy? Which big Alabama running back was it who was just running over you that game?
Well, that was Trent Richardson? I think that
it was either Trent Richardson or Eddie Lacy. Yeah, probably Trent Richardson. Yeah, those two are mix-upable running backs in terms of how they treated LSU and the rest of the SEC.
Yeah. My closest friend is an LSU fan. He actually came up to my place when we were in high school to watch that game, and that was rough. I was probably the quietest watching experience I think I've ever had in a football game. How do you console somebody when he's watching his offense not be able to cross midfield?
Right. Like Najee Harris would make me feel helpless if I was an opposing fan, but like he would make you feel helpless in like the nice way. Like he kind of like Le'Veon Bell, like he'd go a little slow. He'd hurdle you or something. Those old school Bama running backs of the early Saban years was just like, this is violence.
This isn't fun. Yeah. This isn't even fun.
Yeah. It's like, what are we doing here?
And the funny thing is, it's like, it was bound to happen because of exactly what you said about the 9-6 game. Alabama was a better team that day. Like 2011 LSU is an incredible team that will never get its due because of the 21-0 loss. Mm-hmm. But Alabama was better that night in Tuscaloosa, and it shouldn't have gone to overtime. And you have all the dropped interceptions, and you have the Eric Reed interception. It was an interception, but it's like a 50-50 thing that, if the ref sees it a different way, then Alabama has a ball in like the 1 yard line or a touchdown and they score, and that's it. Like, so like, yeah, I think, like, I know we don't want to believe it as LSU fans, but yeah, that Alabama was a better team that year, even though 2011 LSU was dominant for 99% of that season.
Seth, you're speaking in a way as though LSU fans don't know how to get to Canada, sir. I'd be careful with how we posit that 2011 season.
I'm saying it was like they were awesome, even with the quarterback play wasn't even great that year. It was okay, and they were still an incredibly dominant team. So I'm I don't know. It's just Alabama was inevitable. Alabama is inevitable. And I think we got to remember that. Okay, so going from that to our favorite kind of college football moments that don't involve our favorite team. Alex, do you have something for us?
Yeah, I think a few kind of teams and moments that I just really, really have enjoyed in my growth with college football. 2006 Rutgers, even though it was Greg Schiano and Ray Rice, and I mean, in different ways, those are unsavory figures. I think that they were a great example of how if enough things break right, aka if a bunch of the good teams from your conference leave your conference right at the time when you have a bunch of upperclassmen who are pretty good, then even if you are a historically moribund program like Rutgers, you can be really, really good. And I think they went 11-2 or something that year and finished tied at the top of the Big East. Pretty fun. 2013 Auburn, just like everybody else. I think that's maybe the most lovable, fun team ever in college football that didn't win a national championship, or maybe even that did, including those teams that did, because you had not only the prayer at Jordan, but you had the kick six, you had the incredibly fun face off with Jameis and Florida State, which like they just came out on the wrong side of. You had Trey Mason, who's like a really fun running back for that Auburn team, and you had a DB playing quarterback. So like lots of fun things I think were afoot with 2013 Auburn.
CFL All-Star Nick Marshall playing quarterback.
Absolutely, put some respect on that name. And also I love 2020 Coastal Carolina. I think Seth, you wrote probably the best article of anyone about how their offense forced defenses into lose-lose predicaments, where either you could bring down a safety to avoid getting crushed on these kind of speed options, or you could get just roasted. But if you did that, you would just get roasted by Grayson McCall and Javon Hiley and some of they had a really good tight end whose name eludes me, who gets down the field really well. So like, they were just a ton of fun, and they played at the beach. It's a shame it happened during a pandemic year, but they were a ton of fun to watch at. And I think that I will always remember 2020 Coastal as a really fun team.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Favorite season from non
could be just game. I actually put for my list. I put just individual games. So like,
I mean, the 2013 Auburn team is the one that stands out. Like that was probably like, aside from watching USC, that was probably the most fun I've had watching a team throughout the season, especially because it felt like the wins got more ridiculous as the year went on. That was definitely fun, and then to see Trey Mason's profile rise to where he was a legitimate Heisman candidate because of it, and he was a very fun running back to watch. Favorite moment, sorry, Michigan fans, because I really do love the program, but that 2018 game when they were all riding high and thought that they had a chance to win a national championship, and then they go into Buckeye Stadium and give up 62 points to the Buckeyes. Like that to me was even more enjoyable than watching the overtime game.
That was crazy. I remember. I had no horse in that race, but I remember my cousin was getting married that Saturday. So I'm like missing this game, and I'm like checking my phone from the wedding venue, like what's going on here. And I looked, and it was like I saw a 50 something on Ohio State's score in like the third quarter or whatever the hell it was. And I was like, oh my God. And then I realized it was somehow even worse than the box score laid out. And yeah, I mean, they should have won that game. Like Michigan was a better team that year, and it just didn't happen. Really tough.
That's the man covered the mesh game, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll start with like, because there's like some obvious ones, but they're just like, they're so entrenched in my how I feel about college football, is like the USC Texas Rose Bowl. I mean, it's just like that's the best game of all time, right? Like that's
the NCAA said that game never happened. So I don't know what you're talking
about. Like I think for people of our generation, like that's the game, right? That is the game is Vince Young versus Reggie Bush. Then I'll also say the Fiesta Bowl, which the Boise State Oklahoma Fiesta Bowl, which is, I think that might be above it, just because like when we want to believe in like the myth, the folklore of college football, of underdogs and like teams out of nowhere and blah 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 and comebacks and upsets and stuff like that, then that game is number one for me. Again, it's like my formative years, because I'm like 17 or 18 or something like that, and so these games stick with me. And that game was incredible because you have a huge underdog coming out and taking like a 24-10 lead or something like that with Boise State, Jared Zambransky, and some receivers who maybe got a sniff in the NFL, like Legadoo 9A or something like that. And like Oklahoma coming back with a quarterback that I looked this up. His name was Thompson. I don't remember this guy one bit. And they come back, and then Zambransky throws a pick six with a minute and a half left, only for the hook and lateral and then the Statue of Liberty to come in overtime after Adrian Peterson scored on the first play of overtime. And then Boise State scored on a fourth down and over. Like, it's crazy. It makes no sense how good a game that could be. And then my third one is a recent one. It's honestly like, I kind of forget about it sometimes, but Georgia, Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl, and then in the semifinal a few years ago, is insane.
Yeah, it was an amazing game. Honestly, it's an amazing game. If people have not gone back to rewatch it, there are a lot of exciting plays in that game that you have forgotten about. It's a great game from start to finish too.
Do either of you have like the game from do you guys remember your first like college football game, either one that you went to or one that you remember on TV or something like that?
I don't remember my first game, but I remember like as a block, like my earliest games, which were at Pitt Stadium, which they demolished when the football team moved to Heinz Field. But you could go down and walk like on the track during the game, like on the very, very far reaches of the field. So you're pretty far away from the action, but like I'm 4 or 5. I'm thinking this is the coolest thing in the world. So I was down there, every week, and I had a great time.
USC didn't really get good until like my preteen years. So like as far as favorite team goes, it was the USC Oklahoma game. That was probably the one where I was like, wow, like I like a team that won a national title and won a national title like going away. That was probably the first real moment where I was like, yeah, I'm in. Like they definitely had me hooked. That season, capping it off with that win, definitely had me hooked forever.
Okay, let's go into individuals. Favorite player on your favorite team? You can name one. You can name 100. Go for it.
So Pitt has punched above its weight class in terms of just having some absolutely incredible players, I think. Pitt, I can make a pretty compelling case. Not perfect, but one could argue that they've had the best receiver, best corner, and best defensive tackle of this century in the NFL. And that's been true at least in certain years. That's been true with Larry Fitzgerald, Aaron Donald, and Darrelle Revis, at one given time or another, I would argue. Donald was incredible. I think Pitt fans were some of the few who realized exactly what they had when he was there. He was just completely destructive, particularly his last year at Pitt. Same with Revis. But Larry Fitzgerald's the best college football player I've ever seen. Seeing him in person, you felt like you were seeing history, and you were. He was incredible because not only, the numbers speak for themselves. What he did to cornerback speaks for themselves, but he wasn't really, he wasn't a burner. He didn't jump that high. He certainly was not like a big measurables guy, but he just had like, he was pretty big and he had really good hands, but he just had like this weirdly great body control and like this way to manipulate space. And like, I think the most incredible play I ever saw him make was Pitt was playing Texas A&M one year, I think in 2003, early 2003. And it's a deep ball from Rod Rutherford to Larry Fitzgerald. The safety who's running with him, it's the safety at this point because the corner has been long dispatched. And the safety has outside leverage. The throw is to the outside. And Fitzgerald can't see the ball because he's looking towards the inside of the field. And somehow he senses where the ball is, like in a way that might have been pass interference, but like no one could ever see it in real time. Just like somehow flips the leverage and puts himself on the outside. And then like with a millisecond to catch the ball, sees it into his outside arm and catches a touchdown. Completely impossible catch. Should like defied laws of physics. And it was amazing. And he also, regularly abused corners on fades, like goal line fades, bad play unless it's him because it was a guarantee. D'Angelo Hall probably still has nightmares about what Larry Fitzgerald did to him a couple years in a row when Pitt played Virginia Tech. So yeah, that guy, I'll never see anything like it again in college football. Devontae Smith last year was not as good as Larry Fitzgerald at Pitt, which is hard, incredible to think, but it's true.
Yeah. Based on who my favorite program is, I don't know, at least in my lifetime, I don't know if I'm even allowed to have an answer other than Reggie Bush.
Like, he's no answer for non-LSU players.
I could give other guys that I maybe enjoyed more as I grew up, but it would be disingenuous of me to say that like my favorite player during my time as a USC fan is not Reggie Bush, especially like his junior year. And I think we were talking about it in our group chat, Seth, before, maybe a week or so ago. The guy averaged a first down every time he touched the football. That's, for a running back, that is unprecedented. Like there is no other point of reference for that. As a receiver, as a returner, as a running back, easily the most electric player I've seen in college football. So like that's it. Everybody else kind of falls beneath him. I really liked Robert Woods because he was one of the best receivers in the conference and in the country, basically from the moment that he stepped on the field, from his freshman year all the way through. Marquise Lee was another guy I really enjoyed. And then obviously as a defensive player, I love watching Keith Rivers and Ray Maluga. Like those two were awesome to me as well.
Okay, my question for both of you is: we have two kind of different tiers of like quarterbacks on like USC versus Pitt. So, like, who was your favorite quarterback? You know, you mentioned like a forgotten man in Rod Rutherford earlier. Like, who was your favorite like Pitt quarterback? Obviously, we're talking about guys who were good college football players compared to USC. Who was your favorite quarterback on USC? Diante. Obviously, the level is different.
Yeah,
right.
We're thinking a little different, guys. Yeah, I mean, Rod Rutherford and Tyler Palko were fun at Pitt. Tyler Palko was, I think they were both Pittsburgh guys. They both, loved being Pitt players. They both put up good numbers. They were fun to watch. They could both run around a little bit. So I loved watching both of them. And, it'd be nice if Pitt could recapture some of that with their current quarterback, but that hasn't seemed to be in the cards.
My Heisman sleeper pick, Kenny Pickett.
Oh, okay. All right. Fantastic. You said it. Not me.
Right. My favorite quarterback. That's tough. It might be Sam Darnold. Or if for no reason other than I was just so entertained, and I think just the same person I mentioned earlier, Justice Mosqueda, gave me this idea, and I've never been able to unsee it. He plays quarterback like a linebacker, which is a position that he played in high school and through youth. Like his entire idea of playing quarterback is just like throw, make throw. Like there's really not a whole lot more to his thought process, especially at USC. Like it was very much like I'm just going to throw it because I have the arm to do it. And whoever catches the ball obviously deserved it because they're the one with it. But I don't really care. I'm making the throw because that's how I feel. He was probably the most fun to watch. Most talented in my time is probably Carson Palmer.
Yeah, I think so too.
Especially college, like still healthy, young Carson Palmer is still probably the most gifted quarterback I've ever seen come through USC.
I took it a step further with Darnold because I said like he looks like a linebacker who they gave Wildcat reps to in like Wednesday practice and then said, okay, now you're actually the starter.
Exactly.
Okay, for LSU, I mean, again, Joe Burrow's number one, like whatever, we get it. My favorite player growing up was Skylar Green, the guy who I talked about, scored a touchdown against Georgia in 2003. In a sense, a poor man's version of these great punt returner slot receivers, like Deshaun Jackson and Devin Hester, maybe stuff like that. But I really loved him. And Tyrann Mathieu is the best player I've ever seen up until Joe Burrow. I've never seen a guy affect the game from the positions that he played. Like visually, where it's like, I like number 4 is probably like Glenn Dorsey, the great defensive lineman from LSU. But, when you're watching the games on the broadcast film, defensive linemen affect the game visually. And like DBs and linebackers, there's often like an absence of them on TV is probably a good thing sometimes. With Matthew, it was the opposite. I mean, he just made plays, but everywhere, man. He's batting down the screen pass against, the bubble screen against West Virginia. He's coming on the sack and fumble return against Kentucky. He's got the punt returns against Arkansas and Georgia in this. Like it's just nonstop. He's got the tackle and then strip against I think Texas A&M. Like it's just
that's Oregon too on a punt return.
He gets the strip against Oregon that he takes in the end zone, like on national television. Like to me that was just. I never seen anyone, and LSU had such great, it's DBU, right? So you have like on the same team, you have Patrick Peterson, you have all these really great Morris Claiborne, all these really great players, and I love Corey Webster growing up, but like Matthew just did stuff that I'd never seen, that I didn't think it was possible to do it. Every game he made every game he was involved in the outcome of the game. I think that was special. So let's go on to the next, which is favorite player on your non-favorite team. Like I said, Reggie Bush for me is number one. Alex?
Couple for me. I mean, I just kind of talked about how much I enjoyed Pitt beating him, but Pat White was on The Biggest Rival back when at West Virginia. An incredibly fun college quarterback who really could do everything. I mean, I think he was ahead of his time. I think now every team wants a Pat White. And Pat White was, sort of along with Vince Young, I think, heralding that new era of like, if your quarterback can't do at least a bad impression of Pat White, then he's just not going to be very valuable. You have to at least be able to fake it a little bit. And Braylon Edwards at Michigan was tons of fun.
God,
Loved watching him play football when he was in college.
Oof. Favorite player from a non-favorite team is an LSU guy. It's Patrick Peterson.
Okay.
Like, especially like, and a lot of, I mean, the kind of the common thread through this is like, as I was going through high school, you know, as an athlete, people that I really looked at and kind of wanted to model myself around, it's Patrick Peterson for sure. Like to be as huge as he is physically and still be as like technically proficient, still be as good of a player. He was a great punt returner. He could have played receiver at LSU if he wanted to. Like that was like the entire package as a corner. And, you know, aside from Derek Stingley, he was a guy that I'm very fond of. Like I hadn't really seen another corner that played outside. So not like a Minka Fitzpatrick who's playing in the slot, but to see a guy outside, right. A guy who was like 6'1", 215 pounds, to be that size, run a 4.3 and be able to like really follow number one receivers, like his games against AJ Green, his games against Julio Jones. Yeah. Those are all like iconic performances as I was growing up to me.
A couple more that I thought of. Devin Hester, when he returned the opening kickoff of the season, basically against Florida, I'll never forget that. It was just magic. And here's one, and it's kind of LSU related, and it's Roy Williams from Texas. And most of that is because of what he did to LSU in like the 2002 Cotton Bowl or 2003
some
Cotton
bad
Bowl.
stuff.
Bad stuff. And I was just rewatching some highlights of him, and he was a man. He was a man, and he might be we have a category coming up about NFL busts. But he might be in that category too, because he was magnificent. Absolutely couldn't tackle him. Soft hands. He had everything that you want out of a receiver.
Yeah, it's tough that he played for the Lions, and so he gets remembered like that. Yeah. Because what he was at Texas was really something. Yeah.
All right, let's get into favorite venue. So I haven't been to a ton of college football games, but I've been to enough to give you a little bit of a list. But Alex, what are the best places you've been to watch a game?
You know, I've done an LSU night game before, and the tailgating leading up to it, that was, I think, a unique college football experience. I don't think I'll ever eat that well at a sporting event ever again. I think my favorite stadium itself, like just outside of the experience of the game day and everything, might be the Big House in Michigan. Because I don't think you appreciate the architecture of it. It's dug into the ground completely. I mean, like there's very, very small parts of it that are above ground, like the scoreboard and maybe a couple of seats. But like you just walk into this bowl in the earth and it's unbelievably massive. And it kind of is like the experience of walking in through the concourse is just like really something, because you're like, what the hell? How did this get here? It's a very cool architectural feat.
There are I'm not sure how many, but I imagine there's a small number of places where they have these bowls that are dug into the ground, and like so I've been to Michigan. That's one of the few places I've been. I got to see them the last time they beat Ohio State, which is kind of cool to think about.
So that was like 1960.
Yeah, it was 1965.
Okay, nice.
I was 18, and I saw them play I think the first ever night game at Michigan Stadium against Penn State, which was that was actually I would say a probably cooler experience because because it was the first one. It might have been the second one, but because it was like one of the few ones that they've ever done there, they did a whole show out of it, and it was super fun. But the other bowl that I've been to is Yale. Yale is like you're walking up and like you just see like the top two rows, and then you get there and it's dug in. Yeah. And that's always fun because, and I've said this before, like you do feel like you're going back in time watching a Yale-Harvard game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do. Or either going back in time or watching like a high school game sometimes.
Yeah. And the only other one I've been to, I saw Miami play Wake Forest in the old Orange Bowl before they tore it down. And that the palm trees, the end of the horseshoe is cool. I mean, that's an iconic kind of visual for college football. So yeah, those are basically the three places I've been. Hopefully I can make it more now that there's less travel restrictions next year.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, and the last question we have, Diante, we lost Diante's, but so we'll go on to the last question, which is the surefire NFL Hall of Famers that you watched in college that you knew were going to be Hall of Famers who ended up being busts in the NFL. What's your list?
So I thought Josh Rosen was going to be good. I was one of those people.
So did I.
And I think the reason I probably saw the 5 stars, that was probably part of it. But the biggest reason was that I blamed UCLA having no offensive line, no run game to speak of, helping him. Jim Mora problems, basically, at UCLA. I thought those were the reasons that he never really totally broke through in college. And it turns out that if you don't break through in college, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to break through in the NFL. The obvious exception to that, the new one, is Josh Allen. And I think there could be a long conversation about what it means for my worldview of football scouting that he turned out to be good.
Yeah.
Because he really is a historic exception. There's never been anyone like him who has been the 7th best quarterback in the Mountain West and then gone and been a Pro Bowler. But in general, unless you're Josh Allen, that policy mostly still holds that I guess if you're not, if you don't do much in college, if you can't do much at UCLA, even if your offensive line's bad, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to suddenly put it all together in Arizona or Miami or wherever. And at this point, I think we can confidently say that the dream is dead.
I think we can confidently say that. Yeah, the funny thing about Allen is like now it's going to start a trend of people like talking about, well, just wait for his 3rd year. Like with every quarterback, like I think we're going to see like with Drew Lock this year, Daniel Jones this year, like, hey, just wait for his 3rd year and then everything's going to be fine. He'll just make that jump. And it's like, he's such an outlier.
It's good that Daniel Jones is bad because that would require me to really reassess some things. Because I mean, Daniel Jones was like Josh Allen in terms of like, what on earth is happening here? Like, why is this happening? And fortunately, he is bad. So we don't have to worry about that.
I have 2 running backs, and I think running backs kind of are the, like if we polled a million people, I think running backs would probably be the most common responses of players who we thought were going to be like superstars in the NFL and weren't, just because of the nature of the position. But the 2 I had was Leonard Fournette, obviously. I mean, this guy was the best thing I've ever seen play football. And then going back a little bit, Darren McFadden, and he who ended up having like a good NFL career, like an NFL career that I think a lot of people would take because he played in for many years. But I mean, at Arkansas, he was special. He was different. Just different. Like, punt returner, kick returner, I believe. No, I think Felix Jones actually was a kick returner. But anyways, big play after big play after big play on those Arkansas teams with Felix Jones. And then the early Wildcat stuff was special, and I thought he looked good. He wore number 5 like all the great running backs did, and yeah, I was a big fan of McFadden. The other guy I'm going to say is Teddy Bridgewater. I love Teddy Bridgewater at Louisville. Absolutely could not get enough. He was so polished, so clean, so technical. And yeah, obviously the knee injury didn't help, but I also kind of believe he probably, even without it, there was always going to be a ceiling for Teddy. And he'll, so that's, I wouldn't say he's not a bust for sure, like kind of Fournette and McFadden, but he never really was the Teddy that I hoped he would be.
I always felt like I held on to that one for a while, like even up to like last year.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And it didn't happen, which sucks, but life goes on.
Ooh, this is a tough one for me. I mean, Reggie Bush obviously would be an answer. I heard you mention Seth, and it's true. Like, probably feel that way about a lot of the running backs, especially from like my era as a child. But for me, the only other 2 I can think about would be like Percy Harvin. That's definitely somebody that I was convinced was going to be like a break in the NFL type of player. And I think you mentioned too, Darren McFadden. I thought he was going to be like that utility guy that could do everything just like Percy Harvin. It just didn't work out that way in his career. I mean, and health is a factor. It's unfortunate, but sometimes that's just the difference, whether or not it works out for a guy.
All right. There it is. That was the PFF College Football Podcast with Alex Kirshner and Diante Lee. Alex, where can the people find your work?
The people can find me on Twitter at Alex_Kirshner, Kirshner. Would love to hang out with you there. You can read me at slate.com. And from other times to times, you can read me at Men's Journal or 538. or any number of other places that hire me to write about sports. So I would love to hang out with you on the internet.
All right, you hear that? Go hang out.
Oh, and I have a podcast. Thank you. Most importantly, please subscribe to Split Zone Duo. We would love to have you as well.
You can also subscribe to their Patreon, which gives you bonus content, which is very important too.
Yes, that's at splitzoneduo.com.
All right, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Diante. All right, there you go. That was the PFF College Football Podcast with myself, Diante Lee, and Alex Kirshner. Hope you guys liked it. And we'll be back next week, continuing our series on the returning college football players. We're going to the defensive side of the ball with the defensive linemen with me and Anthony Tresh. So stay tuned for that next week. Thanks a lot, and see you guys later.